Okay, I'm also going to share a PowerPoint with you, so because just want to go through some of the slides on here. Can you all see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
No? Did someone say no?
Yes.
Oh, okay, cool. Okay, right, so these are our course participants. As you can see, we have got some photos missing. What we find really useful is this really helps us to, when we do a lot of paired work during this course. So if we've got your images, then we can show who you're paired with for that particular week. So if you've got a headshot missing, could I please request that you send us a headshot? Or if you don't like the photo that we've got of you, then please send us another so that we can replace it. So if you can do this in time for next week's session, that'd be much appreciated. Okay, let's ignore this slide for this week anyway. We're not going to mute. We're not going to turn our webcams off. We do. There's a chat box as well that you will notice in the panel. So what we do often request people to do when you're not visible and you're not able to speak to us is to type a message into chat box, and that raises awareness of any questions that you may have or any technical issues that you may have, and feel free to raise your hands as well, because that also alerts us that there's something that you want to raise. Okay, so we're just going to test some of these features now. So if I could ask you all to type in the chat box what your role is, what your name is, what your role is, and which grades you work with. And that's a good way of introducing yourselves to everyone else.
I don't know. I don't see a chat box.
Okay, so there's a number of tabs that you've got, and sometimes you have to click on the tab to expand it.
Yep. They're blue horizontal bars, and the last one says chat. And if you click on it, the box will drop down. And in the bottom, it says type message here in the smaller rectangle.
I don't know. I wasn't.
Yeah. Stephanie, we haven't seen anything from you.
I sent it. It's there.
Go.
Oh, there it is. Sorry, you've just seen it.
That's great. And just a note about the chat box, as you probably figured out, that every time you hit the hard return, it sends the message. And there are going to be times when you're using the chat box to talk back and forth. And for the benefit of the person who's receiving, like if you're the person who's typing, it's better to kind of hit the hard return a sentence at a time so that they know you're still there. Otherwise, if you type away for 2 or 3 minutes, they may wonder if you're still in the room or if you've wandered off to do something else. So just so that you know, every time you hit the return bar, it posts the message, but you can continue to type and add on to that message by just adding another sentence and hitting the return. Great. It looks like everyone understands how to use that part of GoToTraining.
Lovely. Okay, we now have a poll that we'd like you to do. So I'm just going to open up the poll and share that with you. Right, on your screens now, you should be able to see a poll that's asking the question, how would you describe your experience with action research? So if you could please come complete that for us. Okay, you've all done it. So what we see on our screen is that we can see how many of you have done it, and we get the results back. So what I can see is that 50% of you would describe your experience as good, and 50% of you describe it as little. Well, by the end of the 10 weeks, hopefully you'll all be saying exhaustive. Okay, so I'm going to close that. And another poll for you is, how would you describe your experience with go-to training? So tell us. Okay, so we've got 25% familiar, 25% are somewhat familiar, and half of you not familiar at all. Well, so far you're all doing really well, so well done.
Yep. And if at any time during today's session, if you have questions about the technical aspects of go-to training, you're not finding something, do just what you've been doing all along. Yeah. Just let us know, and we'll help you solve those problems right away. We expect that by the end of next week that you will all be ticking very familiar if you were doing the same poll.
Yeah, I hope so.
It has a few features that we'll be using over and over and over again. So once you understand the features, it becomes very easy.
Okay, I'm going to hand over to Ben now, and Ben's going to introduce the next part.
Right. So I want to now begin talking about the content of the course. And before we do that, we are going to do a couple of quick things. We're going to watch a short video that has been developed by Jaquinette Brown. Jaquinette Brown is was the lead developer of the course materials for this course. She did this when she was a PhD candidate at Harvard Graduate School of Education last spring. She did graduate from Harvard. She did get her PhD, and happy to say that she now has a position in a school district outside Cleveland, Ohio, working at the district level on curriculum. The short video that I'm going to show you in just a moment provides just a really quick summary and overview of action research. And again, for those of you who have good knowledge of action research, I'm hoping that this video kind of reinforces or reminds you of some of the things that you know already. For others of you who are just beginning to develop your understanding of action research, I'm hoping that it's kind of a good, easy to understand introduction. And again, remember that we will be recording this entire session so that you'll be able to go back and watch this video anytime that you'd like. So we're going to go ahead now and turn the video on.
Hello, and welcome to your Action Research course. Whether you're a novice or have engaged in numerous action research cycles, this course will help you and your colleagues work together to refine your practice and ultimately increase student learning. As you go through this course, I encourage you to take time to visit these journals. The first is the Journal of Curriculum and Instruction. The second is Network's Online Journal for Teacher Research. And finally, there's the Canadian Journal of Action Research. These are all open access journals, and they're all devoted to action research. I also encourage you who are taking this course in groups to share relevant resources with one another as you come across them. Now, what is action research? The goal of action research is a positive change in everyday practice in one's own classroom, school, or district. It is largely about encouraging teachers to be continuous learners and proactive actors in their own classrooms. Action research is also about incorporating reflection into the daily teaching routine. The willingness to critically examine one's teaching in order to improve or enhance it, so that teachers become empowered to make informed decisions about what to change and what not to change. Every teacher to some degree has probably displayed characteristics of a researcher. When you were experimenting with a new instructional strategy to help a struggling student, you were doing informal research. When you spent time reflecting on student outcomes and how you might approach the topic differently next time, you were thinking like a researcher. Action research is just more formalized and a systematic approach to reflective practice. Action research is a cyclical process. You'll find many graphical representations out there to reflect this, but I think the cycle is best represented by Hendricks in the book Improving Schools Through Action Research. The cycle consists of 3 stages: reflect, act, evaluate. It begins with teacher reflection. As teachers reflect, they consider their current instructional challenges and define the problem they will focus on. In the act stage, teachers learn about relevant strategies from reading research and from collaboration with colleagues. Teachers develop a plan for implementing the strategy they will study in their classrooms. Then, in the evaluation stage, the teacher is collecting data to get feedback on the instructional strategy. This could be in the form of observations, questionnaires, or test scores. The teachers once again reflect as they analyze and interpret data and use that information to plan the next set of action. Action research is different from traditional education research. In traditional research, the researcher is an outside observer. In action research, the researcher is a study participant. Traditional research is often conducted with a random sample of students. In action research, the population that is studied is composed of the individuals in the practitioner's context. For a classroom teacher, this means the students in your classroom become your study. Finally, the goal of traditional research is to draw conclusions that are generalizable to a larger group. Practitioners engaging in action research are researching for the purpose of changing and improving their practice. The readings for this session will go into greater detail about the purpose of action research and what it looks like in the classroom. As you go through the readings, begin thinking about what it is you would like to study in your classroom. Also, each week you will be responding to questions for reflection in your learning log. You are embarking on an exciting journey of reflection, collaboration, and learning. I hope you enjoy the readings, and next week we'll talk more about your action research question.
Created using Powtoon.
Just a couple of quick notes to follow up on that video presentation. Jacqueline mentioned some of the journals that you could get free access to, and that information was included in the course guide. And all of you will have noticed that one of this week's assignments was from a journal called Network, one of the journals of action research. So I'm hoping you're already beginning to get a feel for what some of those resources might look like. She also mentioned the Hendricks book, Improving School Through Action Research. We have provided a copy of that book for all of you. And generally, you should regard that book as the primary text. I know that there are 2 other downloadable sets of materials that have a lot of the basic information about action research in them. I would suggest that whenever you have the time to read the Hendricks pieces first, and then if you want further explanation, to use the other resources that we've provided. The Hendricks text really does provide the foundation of the information for this course. In some cases, it does go into a bit more depth that we'll be covering in the course, but we'll talk about when that's happening, and I'll explain why that is. So the course syllabus that we sent with the initial email outlines the dates for each of the 10 sessions, and in a moment, I'm just going to say a bit about what the questions are that we're going to be talking about. Each of the sessions is framed by a question. But before that, I just wanted to note in advance that for those of you who are joining us from Doha, that this session starts at 5:30 Greenwich Mean Time, and on the 24th of October, that will change. And so that means that for session 6 on the 27th of October, that our Doha participants are going to be joining us at 6:30 in the evening rather than 5:30. Just to kind of put that on your radar, we will remind you when that comes along. I also want to remind you that in the event of absences, if you aren't able to participate in one of the online sessions, we do need you to continue to complete the course assignments that would have gone with that online session, even if you can't join the session. The reason for that is that all of these sessions build on one another, and you're soon going to see that you're going to be drawing on materials from earlier learning logs, earlier sessions to complete the learning log for the session that is coming up. So again, we understand that from time to time you may need to be absent, you may not be able to attend this live session, but we do ask that you do keep up with the material. Every Tuesday, we're going to send you the resources for the next session, and you should have received that email sometime today. Every Wednesday, so the day after every session, we are going to send you the joining directions for the next live session, as well as information about how to access the recording from the previous session. So let's just take a quick look at what the questions are that we're going to be covering in these sessions. And again, these are designed to build kind of a progressive understanding of action research, and not just action research, but how to actually apply it in your practice. So today we're going to be starting with the obvious question, what is action research? Next week, we're going to be looking at the problem that you're trying to solve, beginning to get at helping you develop an actual research question. Session 3, what does existing research say about my research question? So here we're going to be looking at the background literature that exists around the kinds of questions that you're asking. Session 4, how will I use research to inform my action research? So again, this is asking how you're going to actually use what you've learned by looking at the literature to structure your teaching strategies, your approach to assessing those strategies. Session 5 is going to look at the data collection methods that you're going to use. And in session 5, we are going to begin to talk about not just the use of traditional assessments for learning, things like tests and quizzes that might come from textbook companies or companies that have created reading programs or maths programs, but also looking at assessing metacognition and non-cognitive outcomes. In session 6, we're going to be looking at the steps that you're going to take to conduct an action research project. Session 7, how do I assure my research is valid and reliable? So we're going to be examining what we mean by validity and reliability and how you achieve those in a classroom-based, practitioner-led action research project. Session 8, how do I analyze data? In this session, we're going to be focusing on analyzing qualitative data because a lot of you will be very familiar with analyzing quantitative data. Session 9, what can you learn from data? And session 10, what are you going to do with all of these things that you've just learned? Let me just mention or state right here that we're not expecting you to actually do a piece of action research as part of the course, but we are going to ask at the beginning stages that you think about a real research question that you might investigate, because that will help you contextualize all of the information that we're going to be covering and make it a lot more meaningful for you. We are going to ask you to actually look for relevant literature around your research question. So you're going to develop a question, you're going to think about and develop some strategies for how you're going to collect data, but you're not actually going to carry it out. And I say you're not going to carry it out. You're not required to carry it out as part of this course. We're hoping that all of you are actually thinking ahead and are using this course as a way to make it really practical and thinking of ways you're actually going to use this in your practice. So some of you may actually formulate a research question that is something that you will carry out as part of your own professional development or part of one of your own professional goals that you've set for this year. All right, so let's start by taking a look at Learning Log 1.1. Again, with the Learning Logs, we give you the option of either downloading them and working on them electronically, or if you prefer, printing them out on paper and handwriting responses. But in each of the sessions, we are going to actually talk about what you've done as part of those learning logs. So it is important that you do have a look at them. Even if you don't have a chance to formally write responses to them, we want you to at least have thought about what those responses are before you join the sessions, so you can join in the discussions. All right, so we are going to, again, practice using one of the features on GoToTraining. And what I would like you to do is, using the chat box, type in your definition of action research. Remember, don't hit return until you've typed in your entire definition, because it will post whatever you typed so far.
Right, so from Christy, we've got problem solving for research, observe, reflect, plan, do, observe, reflect, plan, do, observe, etc. Quantitative and qualitative, authentic, respectful of competition. Let's not try to eliminate as many variables as possible. And Julie says, an ongoing cycle of planning, acting, observing. Barbara says, when the researcher is part of the research, not just an outside observer. A process when a teacher reflects on an issue or problem she has come across, then does research either independently or collaboratively. Angela goes on to say that these are issues, either the specific issues and personal to teachers. Angela goes on to say that action research is authentic, purposeful, inquiry-based response to an issue, problem, or query in their own classroom. And Angela goes on to say there's practical, reflective, and recursive.
All right, what I would like you to do next, I mean, thank you for those. I think that those all are really working toward a very kind of sound definition of action research. But to help kind of distill a lot of information, what I would like you to do as the next task is I want you to scroll through those chat responses and identify common ideas or phrases. And if you put those into the chat box just as short phrases or words. So again, you're looking for common phrases or ideas that are reflected in two or more of the different responses that people have given. So Barbara has put in cyclical, Christy added cycle, Angela problem solving, and reflective.
Every time that I try and scroll up to look at them, it goes back down to the nearest or the most recent comment.
Yeah, that is the problem with the chat, that it always takes you back down to the latest one.
As soon as someone hits return, it goes. That's why it jumps to the bottom, because someone has just added something. So
I realize that it's just problematic.
Angela's also put collaborative. And Stephanie's saying reflective also. Looking good. And to improve teaching and learning.
Those are great. For us, one of the added benefits of leaving your microphones on is we can hear people typing. In the past, when we didn't do that, we had no idea if people were done responding. And now that we can hear no more keyboard clacking, I'm going to assume that those are all the responses, and thank you for those. We're going to go on to the next slide. And in the next slide, we're going to actually see some of those ideas that you were just talking about reflected in kind of the formal approaches that the Center for Inspiring Minds takes to action research. So as a concise definition, one of the ones that I really like comes from the Hendricks book, and it's on page 2 of the Hendricks book. And that definition is that research projects that concentrate on or investigate whether actions result in desired outcomes, both qualitative and quantitative. And of course, they have a lot of the features and qualities of the words and descriptors that you used in your definition. But this idea that they concentrate on or investigate whether actions result in desired outcomes. I think that as teachers who are constantly making decisions about teaching strategies, sometimes planned long in advance, sometimes planned kind of on the hoof as you go along because of things that change in your classroom, that action research really is the structured way to actually see if those result in the outcomes that you're looking for, and looking for results both in qualitative and quantitative terms. The Center for Inspiring Minds talks about these 4 elements of action research that are important to the way that we work with teachers on action research projects. And the first of those is that action research is student-centered. And what we mean by this is that action research addresses questions about what students need you to do so that they learn better, faster, deeper, with more enthusiasm. But the question always comes from the student perspective. What is it that the student needs me to do, or needs me to do differently, or needs me to do better, or needs me to do in addition to what I'm already doing? Number 2, action research is practice-based. And again, what we mean by that is that it's based in your everyday practice. In your everyday practice, what you spend a lot of time doing is looking at student data to understand the starting point of where your students are. You look at the standards that you're trying to address. You set for yourself. You think about what the individual and class growth goals are. So, how far do you want the class to move from where they are right now to where they'll be at the end of whatever this teaching episode is? How do you want them to grow individually? How do you want them to grow as a group? You're selecting and using different teaching strategies to get from point A to point B. You're assessing progress. You're evaluating learning outcomes. Action research is about all of those things that you do every day. It's not about coming up with a research question that's completely outside what you do as your day job. It is the day job. It's also research focused, which is the third item in the pink block. And what we mean by that is that it does employ formal quantitative and qualitative assessments. And those assessments are of both cognitive and non-cognitive and metacognitive outcomes. And that action research follows a research process. And we're going to talk more about that process over the course of this course. Finally, it's inclusive and participative. And what we mean by that is that the teacher or the person doing the action research is actually part of the action research project. This isn't about research on participants, it's research with participants. And when we say with, we could be referring to colleagues, we could be referring to parents, we could be referring to students. In an action research project, everybody who's participating is part of the research project. It's not doing research on someone or on something. I want to jump right into trying to look at what this means in practice. And I would like you, for the next part of this discussion, to refer to your responses in Learning Log 1.2. We had sent you a copy of this case study. It's a publication from Networks, the online journal of teacher research. This is a free journal. You can access it at any time. You can look through the contents of all the different research projects that they have published. This particular one we pulled out is from spring of 2013, so a fairly recent one. And we pulled it out because it was very, very typical of the kind, if you were to do an actual research project, take it all the way through to publishing your results, this represents a very typical kind of question that I think teachers ask every single day. They don't always use a formal research approach to it. They don't always produce results that they feel are worth publishing. But this case study really captures that process and really emphasizes how much it's part of the actual practice that people do on a day-to-day basis. All right, so we're going to go through the essentially kind of the questions that were part of Learning the Log 1.2. And we're going to close the PowerPoint in just a moment so that we can see your faces and ask you to physically raise your hand. We're not going to use the raise your hand feature in GoToTraining, but physically raise your hand and respond to some of the questions on the Learning Log sheet. So we're going to start out with that first one, which is, what is the research question? And again, if you raise your hand and then we will call on you and then you can speak. Barbara.
How does the introduction of the request reading technique affect reading comprehension of world history textbooks in a social studies classroom?
Fantastic. I'm hoping in that question that you all can see something that you do every day. You can take any unit that you're teaching using a teaching strategy and ask the exact same question. Now, you wouldn't ask this question if it was something you've done a million times, but if you were introducing something for the first time and you wanted to have evidence for yourself that it was an effective teaching strategy with your group of students, that's when you would turn it into a more formal actual research piece. Yeah? Let's go on to the next question in that learning log. How did the researcher investigate the problem? Let's go to Christy, and then we'll have Barbara add in anything that she would like to add.
Collected data from a series of paired sample quiz scores. They selected 20 students by convenience because they were their teacher, but actually it was only 14 because 6 of them didn't hand in their work or didn't get any parental consent. It didn't have any control of variables such as gender, race, etc. And they carried out the activity and looked at the data collected at the end to compare to see if there was an improvement looking at standard deviations.
Great. Barbara, do you want to add anything else or anyone else? Start with Barbara.
I just said that I just sort of put more detail into the technique. So he modeled, he explained I don't know if it was a he or a she actually, he explained to the students what actually he was going to do, and then modeled the technique first, and then was quite specific about the kind of questions he wanted them to ask. And then it became peer-to-peer rather than teacher to student. So yeah, that's what I was going to add.
Great, thanks. Angelina, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, much has been said, but I was just wanting to reiterate the fact that the teachers saw some issues, wider issues that could be connected to the classroom level that the teacher was instructing in. And in addition to the sample size, the groups that the teacher was addressing, he or she realized that there are certain techniques, instructional strategies, there are some tools that she can or he can probably use in order to come out with the study itself.
Great, thank you. Steph, do you want to add anything?
No.
Okay.
Not at
I
this
don't know what I would add either. I was kind of checking off the things on my notes that I'd made for myself, and there was nothing in there that was really left out. Again, I wanted to just kind of draw attention to a couple of things that sometimes seem not to make so much sense if we're talking about research. This idea that this piece of research only involved 20 students. And as Christy said, it was completely a sample of convenience. It wasn't randomized. It didn't involve comparing the class to a control group. This is the way that action research is different from empirical educational research. And again, I was hoping that by actually looking at the method that this particular researcher had used, that you actually see a method that you use every day, day after day, week after week, month after month in your classroom. The only thing that makes this different is that this person has formalized the approach. They've recorded what they've done in a very kind of thorough way. They've consulted the literature as a kind of a guide in terms of understanding the efficacy of the technique, the different kinds of assessments that could be used. What were the results? Let's go to the next question. And again, just raise your hand. What were the results? Go ahead, Anjali.
Increased comprehension skills?
Yep. Anything else? Barbara?
Yeah, they did. The students did improve their general social studies text comprehension quite a lot, but I think maybe that's the next question. But this led to what he found led to more questions, which I thought was quite, and it was kind of like he thought it did work, but it led to a lot of other questions about the validity of the study, I thought.
Great. Yeah.
For me?
Christy.
Yeah, no, it is Chris actually. Yeah, no, I was vaguer. I just said an improvement was noted, but there was a dip in the fourth quiz scores, and then he went on to explore. I wasn't going to talk about the numbers.
Yeah. Christy, one of the things you had mentioned earlier was that there was a drop in the standard deviation. And again, one of the things that suggests is that originally there may have been a bigger gap in achievement among the students, and we're now seeing that beginning to narrow. And always, it's always one of the big challenges in a classroom where you have a huge range of student experience and ability. That how do you actually do something that doesn't just meet the needs of the able students, but it actually kind of brings everyone along in that process. Oftentimes, especially I'm going to draw kind of my experience working in Doha, where there are a large number of EAL students in the classroom, and we all know that teaching strategies that are well suited, that work well for EAL students, actually work well for all students. And so, some really interesting questions around this method. I mean, is this a method that may seem like it is too structured or a little bit remedial in some ways, but by taking that scaffolded approach through this method, does it actually carry everyone along and kind of begin to diminish that gap in achievement? Let's go on to the final question, because I think that one is interesting. Every action research question, the result always is more questions, and in some ways that's an interesting thing. For some people that may seem like an overwhelming thing, that you never actually get to the end because of the cyclic nature of action research. But what were some of the topics that the researcher identified for further study? And again, go ahead and raise your hand and we'll Start with Chris.
I got 4. I said effects on the larger groups. Well, this one was very broad. Effects on larger groups in a variety of settings over a longer period of time. Looking at the novelty effect, which is the dip in the 4th quiz scores that he was sort of, wanted to know if it was just because it was something new and exciting. I think, Barbara, you were touching on that and saying it was the next question. Other options such as reciprocal teaching to see if there'd be effects from that as well, and the influence of the request on higher order historical thinking skills.
Yeah.
I think that's all I've got.
Thank you. Yep. Anyone else? Other things?
He said.
Sorry, go ahead.
He said something about comparing the request to other techniques of question clarifying technique, and maybe analyzing the questions that were written down on the index cards would be something to look at as well.
Great. Angela, did you have anything else?
I just wanted to briefly add to what Barbara was saying, that the teacher is also feeling that there is a mixed method approach that could be adopted in future to assess how this request program has worked effectively.
Great. One of the other things that also was mentioned was using additional data sources to measure reading comprehension and metacognition. And again, one of the real challenges in action research is to collect enough different kinds of data to be able to triangulate your results. And what I mean by that is to be able to look at the outcome from different perspectives. And we're going to talk about triangulation when we get into our data section. But clearly, the person at the end of this research piece had a lot of really great questions, and they're probably the same kind of questions you ask yourself when you finish the unit and you see what the result was, and you begin to say, well, was this the best strategy for this? Are there other strategies I could have tried? Would a blended strategy work better than any one of these pure strategies? Yeah, it's just the nature of action research. It's cyclical, and it always is asking a next set of questions. I want to ask one more question here, which it was not something that was part of the, go back to the slides maybe just for a second. It wasn't part of the learning log. And that is, what did you learn about action research that you think you're going to be able to use in your own process? So is there something that we've seen in the case study or talked about in the case study that reinforces something you do all the time, or something that you were aware of but maybe don't do, something that you want to kind of keep in mind as we go through the course and we work on this kind of schematic of what could be an action research project? And again, just raise your hand and we'll. Steph.
You mean in general?
In general, yeah.
In general?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that the students in my classroom will be much more involved in the results that I document, I guess. So last year I did one, but it was very much me observing them and the results that they were producing and if they were transferring it. But I think this year in the one that I designed, that they will have a much bigger voice than they did it last year.
Great, thanks. Anyone else? Angela.
One of the things that I'm still thinking about is in terms of how action research makes an educator think about the need for solving a problem. Now, it may not be a problem, like how you said, what do students expect of me? What are they expecting out of a classroom? So it makes you really think as to what is one thing, or what are those things that I've been ignoring in my practices. And of course, it is called as reflection. Mm-hmm. But I think it's the whole thought process of identifying a need.
Great, thank you. Barbara?
Yeah, it astonished me at just how structured this whole, 10 pages of the write-up was. And, you think about these things all the time. You think, oh, how can I do that? How can I do that? But to actually structure it formally, it sort of interested me. but the data collection, well, the way, you know, when it came to the data and the benchmark and request one and the mean and the SD and everything, I must say, you know, this is where I really struggle, because I don't get figures and things like that. So this was like, you know, that sort of made me think, oh, you know, so I may need some help with that. Yeah, but the structure of it, you know, and how I can really improve your if you analyze a problem and evaluate how I can really improve everything in your, you know, whatever the problem is in your class for you and the students.
Yeah, yeah. I will say that in this, with most published case studies, you do see a good use of basic kind of statistical techniques, but don't be intimidated by that, because simply by all that's required to make data valid as a scientific piece is processing the data. So even representing things as percentages or as in very, very simple processed ways is the first step in presenting data as research data. You know, as you get more sophisticated, as you begin to ask bigger questions around, you know, differences in learning among different students, if you're looking at a whole class set of data, then you do need to begin looking at some more sophisticated statistical things. But those will all come in time. And in this particular course, we're not going to cover all the possible statistics you might use because those things will be contextualized in your project. You know, not every project will use the same kind of data analysis. And we're going to talk about data analysis in very, very broad terms, but kind of with the caveat that when you actually undertake something, it may require something a little bit specialized, and there's a little bit of self-study to take that on. Yeah, just because this particular study used standard deviations, it doesn't mean that every study is going to use standard deviations. Yeah, thanks for that. Anything else?
I just have one question.
Yeah, Angeli.
Now, when we're talking about presenting our research, action research, the question that comes to my mind is, does it have to be in form of literature review? Or could it be in the form of, say, a module for a course? Or could be something which is a workshop material?
When we get toward the end, toward summaries, we're going to look at a whole range of different ways you actually can present and share action research.
All right.
Writing something up into a formal report is only one way. Yeah, and oftentimes, I know that Barbara and Stephanie right now are part of the pilot group with our teacher professional evaluation system with Standard 8. And Standard 8 essentially is asking people to do a piece of more structured action research. I mean, I'm hoping you actually see, you know, kind of glimmers of the Standard 8 process in what we've been talking about so far. And taking something to the point where you actually write it up as a whole process is not something that you'll do for every piece of teaching, but you might do it for your Standard 8 goal as a way, and you're going to do that by collecting evidence of student learning. You may create it as a portfolio rather than as, you know, a written report. There are lots of different ways that you can present what you've done as part of this work or as part of an action research piece. All right.
Thank you.
I'm going to switch gears just a little bit and ask you to refer to Learning Log 1.3. So in 1.3, all of you will have started to think about an actual problem that you might address. And again, we're not going to ask you to carry out a piece of action research, but we're going to ask you as we go forward to actually frame a research question that's relevant to you. And of course, the more relevant it is, the more that you're going to get out of it, and the more you're going to get out of the course and the process. Because if it's something you actually might be able to use, we think it's a much better use of your time. Just as a general, yeah. So just as a starting point for us, when you think about different kinds of challenges you have in your classroom or in school, there is this kind of taxonomy that's been offered up of how you might classify those different problems. So they have to do with the curriculum, that is with teaching and learning. They might have to do with the design or the management of learning spaces. They might have to do with processes and tools that you use in your classroom. They might have to do with systems like grade books or like all the stuff we're doing with the management information system right now, all the PowerSchool work we're doing. So if you can look at that question that you had, that beginning idea for what you might address, and just in the chat box, either type the word curriculum or spaces or processes and tools or systems, just to give us an idea of the kind of question that you're asking or that you're thinking about asking. And if it's more than one, type in both, because they don't necessarily, they may not be discrete.
Sorry, in 1.9, in 1.3, it says defining need, and we just talked about, in my imagination, it was general ideas about what students need.
So if you were going to classify those needs, do they fall into curriculum, teaching and learning, into spaces, processes and tools, or systems?
Oh, okay.
We've had Anjali saying that hers fall into improve teaching and learning. Processes and tools, systems and spaces for Barbara, and curriculum as well for Barbara.
I guess. Hang on, where's the box gone?
Curriculum, processes and tools for Stephanie.
I'm guessing what Christy said. Chris said.
And Chris has added processes and tools. All right. Great. The reason we offer this is that when people start, as we go through the course, you're going to be sharing some of the work that you're doing in terms of formulating your question and formulating, talking about the different literature resources that you have found that relate to your question. I think it's just good as a starting point to recognize that the different questions address completely different aspects of what happens in schools. And this particular way of organizing those ideas, or this typology, is just kind of one way to think about or to classify the type of question that you're asking. So to the extent that it's useful, we offer that up. We're going to go on now to the next slide. And again, this is referring to Learning Log 1.3. And I'm going to ask you to go to that one. No, let's go to the next one. To actually use the chat box and type your problem into the chat box so that we have a record of that. One of the things we do at the end of this is you'll have a recording of the session, plus you'll have a recording of all of the text that was put into the chat box. And sometimes it's easier for us just to jump into the chat box than to look at the recording to pull some of this information out for following sessions. So again, if you would type the problem that you put into Learning Log 1.3 into the chat box.
I just have one question.
Yep.
I haven't clearly identified my problem.
Okay.
I have many problems that I'm thinking of at this stage. So do I still need to type?
You can write in still in progress or thought in progress.
Sure.
Yep.
I keep thinking back to, I don't know, Stephanie, if it's the same for you, but I keep going back to what we're doing for Standard 8. So I kind of, because we're carrying on with that, that's kind of where I think this will go for me.
Yeah, that's fine.
That's great. Yeah, we always hope that people have an actual real use for the course. But again, we don't want to assume any of those things, and we certainly don't want people to think that they have to have that in order to participate in the course.
So I'm in the same boat as Barbara, because they've extended the project for another year, the trial.
Yep.
Then I feel like the assumption is that we're carrying on with that same trial.
So can you turn that project into a need statement or a problem statement? What is the need or the problem that the piece of work you're doing is addressing?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, everyone. The keyboards have gone silent, so again, I'm going to assume that everyone has entered their information in the chat box. So Anjali, I know that she has a couple of entries here, but her first one says, still in progress, thinking about EAL support in the classroom and making learners reflective thinkers. So again, as we begin to define the research question, which is something that we're going to focus on in session 2, I want you to think about, oftentimes we do this thing called biased action, which is that we perceive a problem and we immediately formulate what the response is. But in session 2, we're going to challenge you to actually identify what the problem is and how you know it's a problem. So what evidence is there to say that it's a problem? I won't go into that a lot more now, but let's just go through the rest of these, because I think that you'll probably see that most people have talked about how they're going to address the problem rather than the problem, the origin of the problem, the evidence for the problem. Barbara is talking about improving reading comprehension. So again, the assumption there is that there's a problem with reading comprehension in the classroom, that perhaps her MAP scores show that reading comprehension levels are below expected grade level, or where students are expected to be at that point. It may even show that over the past year that they didn't achieve the kind of growth that would have been expected over the past year. So again, I want you to begin thinking about not just how you're solving the problem, but what is the problem and how do you know that it's a problem? And again, Barbara's saying by using a specific program in classroom practice. Anjali trying to link to approaches to learning in the diploma program. Stephanie, I introduced a word study program and initiated a trial. The school has now adopted Words Their Way word study program to approach word study and spelling development on an individualized student basis. And again, a great kind of teaching strategy, but thinking back to how did we know that this was a problem? And again, Anjali added that it may be related to service learning. All of those are perfectly great. Again, this is very early. Over the course of this next week, I'm going to ask you to think more about defining your research question. And you can actually find that in session 3, we're going to revisit your research question again. Is it still what you thought it was? In session 4, we'll do the same thing. A research question is something that ends up being kind of a working hypothesis in action research. And very often it changes several times until you actually get to the point where you have a better picture of what the entire process is going to look like. So thank you all very much for that. At this point in the session, we've covered all of the content that we have offered up for this week. I'll go to the next one. Yep. And so at this time, I was wondering if any of you have any questions. And again, we'll use the hold your hand up rather than using the text box. If you have any questions about anything that we've talked about today, the logistics of the course, what to expect as we go forward. Can we see?
Okay.
Yeah.
So they meant hold your hand up here. Oh.
So we're just trying to get your pictures back up on our screen so that we can see if you have your hand up. Yeah. There you go.
There you go, Stephanie.
Go ahead, Stephanie.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question about going forward. So you'd like us to have a quote-unquote problem that we'd like to frame in an action research way? Is that what you're asking us to do?
Yes. And again, as part of this course, you're not required to carry it out. But the more real it is, the more authentic it is, the more relevant it is to what you're doing, the better use of your time the course is going to be. We have had people in the past who've done something completely hypothetical because they weren't at a stage where they were ready to do something. And that's okay as well. But we want you to make that decision about how relevant it's going to be to your current practice.
Well, I think to get the most out of it, it should be relevant. And because we're still participating in the Standard 8 trial, I want it to link to that.
Yep.
But can it be as broad as children learning to spell in grade 2?
Yes.
Because that's essentially what it is.
Absolutely. Yeah. So again,
differentiate.
As you begin to look at the tasks that come in subsequent sessions, if you keep thinking that that's kind of in the direction you're moving, it's great that you have that idea already, because some people in the past course have it's taken people 3 or 4 weeks before they actually have kind of settled on an idea. So the faster that you settle on an idea, the more developed that idea will be, because we begin developing in session 2 already.
Right, and it's not too broad.
I don't think it is. You'll actually be able to figure that out as we go along. And as we go from session 2 to 3 to 4, you're going to go back and revisit that question, decide whether or not it needs to be reframed or rephrased or limited or, yeah.
Thank you.
Barbara, did you?
Chris can go first.
That's okay, I don't mind.
I don't. When I decided to do the Daily 5, it wasn't really because I thought there was a problem. It was more to extend to give myself a different strategy to see if from what I did, could that improve student, reading comprehension, and from that, it led on to I developed this big interest in writing, especially writing for boys. So I don't know, I might need your help to actually come up with what the problem was. I mean, this is Doha, so there's always going to be that, that reading comprehension issue, for the students. But it kind of came from something different. I didn't think there was a problem. It was something to improve me as a teacher.
But that's also a valid interpretation of a problem. When you ask that question, what do students need you to do so that they learn better? If the thing that you need to do is kind of refresh yourself and give yourself some new strategies so that you're excited about what you're doing, that's a problem as well. So in your own personal reflections, you may have noticed that you were getting really kind of, tired of using a particular strategy, and maybe you weren't as enthusiastic about it, you weren't as convinced about it. That's a problem definition.
Oh, okay, yeah. See?
Chris.
Yeah, I was just thinking, because obviously you were saying about linking to MAP scores or sort of external data that can show progress, perhaps, potentially, and that would be helpful with the upcoming Standard 8, as we're obviously not in a pilot program. But the situation that we're in is that we have, for example, the IB is a 2-year program, and so you might only have the students for one of those years. So how much can you actually rely on the end results of that data to inform your research? And in the case of, I'm doing AP Physics this year, I didn't do AP Physics last year, so the teacher that did that had a school result. I can't then target and say, well, physics results last year were an issue because actually we were above the national, the international average for AP Physics. So I can't target, and could we look at, the AP readiness from the SATs scores and say, right, well, I would like to look at raising the students' AP result to above the prediction or the likelihood from the AP readiness app. I mean, I haven't seen how that data is predicted. I've been promised it, but it's not yet come in, or I don't have access to it yet. I mean, is that something that I could use, or?
Absolutely. But let me flip your kind of description on its head and use an example from what Barbara was just saying. It's possible that what students need you to do to help them learn more effectively is to come up with some new ways to provide them with formative assessment data, for example. So
I suggest. Oh, sorry.
It doesn't necessarily need to go back to in the situation you're describing, because of the nature of your pupils and where they come from and how the short time they're with you. There's not going to be kind of a continuum of data that you can draw on in order to identify the same kinds of problems that you would be able to do, like in literacy and numeracy in the lower school. And so your challenge in action research becomes a little bit different, perhaps, than someone who's teaching at those lower grade levels, because you need, all you're going to have is some baseline data from the beginning of the year. And your bigger challenge may be actually how to provide students with that formative feedback or effective formative feedback so that they recognize growth or recognize areas that they need to improve in order to get from point A to point B in the course of 1 year. And that's just an example. I'm just trying to turn it on its head and show you what it might look like if you were, instead of focusing on the student data at this point, to kind of the teaching practice.
Yeah, okay, so feedback is something that I do quite strongly already, and I was trying to link it to data so I was turning it on its head from what it already was.
Yep.
Yeah. So they're already getting quite a lot of feedback. I did say in my little typey thing that I was looking at how to incorporate feedback in more detail to enhance progress, but I was saying, how would that progress be shown? Never mind.
Yeah, and again, I'm assuming that right now with the feedback that you're giving them feedback based on that it's more kind of quantitative data based on quiz scores and test scores, or
No.
no?
I give them a scoring grade book, but normally behind it says you got the questions wrong that needed an explanation using the model, and you needed to explain in more detail this part, or perhaps you were having trouble with the graph interpretation, but you were managing to manipulate the data appropriately. So each student does get tailored feedback, but it's, yeah, I was trying to link it back to the quantitative. Don't worry.
Yeah.
I'll think
With the quantitative, you would have the different quizzes and tests you give, which would be kind of that measure of academic progress or growth over the course of the year. Yeah.
Sorry, because you said map, I was kind of latching to that and thinking that you wanted something external or.
No. It will be different for every project, and in fact, there are some projects that focus almost entirely on non-cognitive skill development. Not necessarily linking it initially with academic achievement. That sometimes is a much more advanced, much more difficult thing to demonstrate.
I used map scores for mine last year, and to predict the growth. There was some pros and cons to that, but I mean it is doable. I don't know what other tests were that you were talking about.
Yeah, we can't use MAP because MAP doesn't align to our curriculum, but they do Chem, which is linked to the IB, and it gives them a predictor, a most likely outcome. And there's the SATs that they do, which can give an idea of whether or not they can do the APs.
Yeah. All right. I think that those, again, all of your ideas and all of your kind of the direction you seem to be going is great right now, and I'm hoping that as you see the additional elements of the course be added, that those will help you kind of further define the ideas that you have, and to the extent that you would like to turn them into formal action research projects.
We get to go to London again.
So Latifa is going to just give a little bit of information about next steps.
Yeah. Okay, so we're coming to an end now. So as well as having the logs 1.2, 1.2, 1.3, you also have the learning log 1.4. And this learning log is purely for your own use. It's just so that you can record what you got out of this session. So, when we get to week 8 and there's something that you're thinking, when did we do that? You can use it as a reference point, and you know which recording to go to, which check transcript to pick up on. Should you need to. So we're not going to assess it, we're not going to ask you to submit it to us, it's purely for your own use, but it is a worthwhile tool to record on.
Every session will have a final learning log that is learning points, and as Latifa said, it's up to you to use that or not use that to whatever way it makes sense for you.
Okay. So as Ben mentioned earlier, you have received the session 2 materials earlier this afternoon. So take a look at those, and that will help you prepare for next week. Tomorrow, from me, you'll receive an email giving you the joining instructions for GoToTraining. It'll give you the link of where to find the recording for this session, and it'll also have the transcript, the chat transcript from this week's session as well. That will become more and more meaningful as the weeks go on. And another thing, next week, also, we'd like you to bring a second device with you, so an iPad or an iPhone, something that has Skype on it. And then what we also like you to do is to share your Skype IDs with each other. We're going to start doing paired work. So we're going to start pairing you up with each other. And what we found when we done the pilot was that people prefer to see each other and to talk rather than to type things into a chat box. So if you could do that. If you don't have a Skype account, they're really easy to set up. They're free. Skype is a free app. It's on an Android and on an iPhone. So if you have any trouble, just contact myself or Ben, and we'll help you get yourself set up. Okay. And I think that is about it for the housekeeping.
Yep. So
Oh, yeah, Barbara.
Did you say we must turn in those learning logs?
No, you don't need to turn in any of the learning logs. They're for your own reference. Unless you want to share them with us because there's a particular question that you have, but they're for your own reference. You don't need to turn them in. We're not going to mark them and give you a grade at the end of the course.
Yeah, it was the last comment that I was going to make is that everything that you record, everything you write, everything you create as part of your participation in this course is for you and for your own use. So you're creating things that are that you're going to use as you see fit. As Latifa said, we're not going to collect anything, we're not going to grade anything, but that doesn't mean that we're not interested. So as we go along, if you want us to read something in between the sessions and give you some feedback, please ask us. We tried to design this course so that it would appeal to the greatest number of people, and it wouldn't put a huge burden on people in the way that participating in a university level course would. And so one of the concessions that we made is that we would not collect and grade work, but we're always here to look at anything you want us to look at and give you feedback, but it's up to you to ask for that. We're not going to assign it as an assignment. What we assign you is generally stuff that we would like you to do because it will prepare you to better have discussions with the other people in the course when we come online. And again, however you choose to record that, we found that in the past, some people have written detailed notes for themselves. Other people just make bullet points on those sheets just to remember what they were thinking so that they can have that discussion during the live sessions. So again, do whatever makes sense for you, whatever you get the most out of. Give us feedback from time to time if you think that you'd like to do more of a certain kind of activity than another. In our pilot, we did do exit surveys every week. We're not going to do those with you. So we're going to really rely on you to let us know, when things have gone well, if you'd like to do more of something, if you don't want to ever see us do that thing again kind of thing. Send us an email, have a Skype call, whatever you'd like to do. We're here, the course is for you, and we want you to get the most out of it. So whenever it seems that you're not getting enough out of it, please let us know. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you. And also, I noticed, Barbara, you put a comment there saying about your iPads.
Yes.
You can actually ask Omar to lend you an iPad if you don't have a second device. So if you don't want to do that, I'm happy to approach him. So
Omar likes us. He hardly ever says no to us.
Yeah.
So if you have any problems, just see us.
I do have.
You're the only one he loves.
Are you the one that didn't give yours back, Stephanie?
Yeah. Just today I gave it back. I said, I'm really sorry. I didn't want to give it back. And Salman's so sweet. He understands. But, and he said he would make an exception if he had to. But I'm like, no, I can buy one, but really sad.
Normal Candy Crush.
All right,
play it.
Thank you again very much. Yeah. We're always going to try to end the session on time. We are a little bit early today, which is always our goal. Yeah. Thank you again for joining us.
Oh, Angeline.
Yeah, I just have one question. At the end of this course, are we issued a certificate or any document that says we have completed the course?
You do, yes.
Yeah, good.
Christy, did you answer this? Oh, okay.
Stephanie and I need to come to London again, I think.
Get us out of the desert.
Maybe we can travel to Doha.
No.
No?
Well, at the end of our course, there may be a question that you all want to work on as a team, and then we never know what can happen.
That's right. Propose a STEM project, work together, you'll have to come to London.
Good.
Have a good afternoon.
I just want to add something, that it is a very good opportunity. It's for the first time that I'm seeing my colleagues from Doha. And Christy, you're from Hillingdon?
No, she's at
Chris is from Cobham.
Oh, great. So it's great to see you all. And
okay, so frozen.
Successful course.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
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 That's good timing. Okay, I need to save my recording.